Maria's life had never been easy. From the moment she could remember, the world had felt heavy on her small shoulders. She lived in a small mountain village where the snow fell harshly in winter and the sun scorched the fields in summer. Her husband, the man she had loved with all her heart, had died in a tragic accident, leaving her alone with a little son, Jacob. The village people, who once had smiled at her and welcomed her, now whispered behind her back. Some shook their heads as she passed, muttering about her bad luck. Others avoided her completely, acting as if misfortune could somehow touch them if they spoke to her. Maria rose early every day before the sun had even begun to lighten the sky. She walked through narrow, winding paths to the fields, carrying a basket of tools and a small sack of grain. She worked the land tirelessly, planting and harvesting, even when her hands were cracked and bleeding from the rough work. Her son, Jacob, always followed her closely, his small feet kicking up dust as he ran behind her. Despite the hardships, Maria never complained. She smiled gently at Jacob and told him, "We will find our way. Better days will come." Though she tried to stay strong, life in the village was lonely. Most men avoided her because she was poor and had a child to care for. Some even said cruel things, whispering that no man would want a woman like her. People saw her as unlucky, as someone who could never have happiness again. Children would run past her in the streets, afraid of the dark sadness they sensed in her eyes. Women in the village often looked at her with envy or pity, and though Maria never spoke against them, she felt the weight of isolation pressing on her every day. Even with all the work and loneliness, Maria never gave up. She woke every morning with determination, finding ways to provide for Jacob. She washed clothes for other villagers, cleaned their homes, and sometimes gathered firewood from the forest to sell. Most days, she went hungry so that her son could eat properly. Her nights were cold and quiet, often spent with Jacob huddled close to her on the thin blanket they shared. She whispered stories to him, tales of heroes and adventures, so that he could dream of a brighter world even if their reality was harsh. Far away from the gossip and judgments of the village, deep in the thick forest, lived a man named Eli. He was a lumberjack, strong and quiet, known for working alone. Eli had lost his parents at a young age, leaving him to fend for himself in the forest. He built a small cabin with his own hands and lived a simple life, chopping trees, selling wood, and surviving off the land. People in the village often joked about him, saying he would die alone in his cabin because no one could stand his silence and solitude. But Eli never minded the whispers. He enjoyed his life of quiet work, of mornings filled with the sound of axes and birds, and evenings spent by the fire listening to the wind sweep through the trees. Despite his solitude, Eli was not unkind. He had a gentle heart and often noticed things others overlooked. He had seen Maria many times, walking along the river or working in the fields, her figure bent with effort, and her eyes focused on the tasks before her. He never spoke to her at first, only nodded politely when their paths crossed. Yet in that quiet acknowledgement there was respect. He admired the way she cared for her son, how she carried her burdens without complaint, and how she always managed a small smile even in hardship. One day, as Maria was carrying a heavy basket of firewood back from the forest, she slipped on the muddy path. The basket fell, scattering sticks and branches everywhere. Jacob cried out, scared that his mother might be hurt. Before Maria could even gather herself, Eli appeared from behind a tree, as if he had been watching over the path. He helped her pick up the scattered wood, lifting the heavier branches with ease. "Be careful," he said quietly, his voice calm and steady. Maria, startled by his sudden presence, only nodded and thanked him softly. There was no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. For the first time in days, Maria felt a flicker of relief. Life continued like this for weeks. Maria worked tirelessly in the fields, caring for Jacob and doing whatever she could to make ends meet. Eli continued his work in the forest, often seeing her from a distance but never intruding. There was a quiet connection between them, a sense of mutual recognition without words. The villagers continued their gossip, unaware of the small, unspoken bond forming between the two. Maria often thought about him, wondering why someone so strong and capable would choose a life so far from people. She also felt a strange comfort knowing that he was nearby, silently watching over her path to the fields. One afternoon, Maria fell ill from exhaustion. She had been working long hours without proper rest, and the weight of her life began to take its toll. She lay on a thin mattress in her small home, her forehead burning and her body weak. Jacob sat beside her, holding her hand tightly. He didn't understand much, only that his mother needed help. As she drifted in and out of sleep, she thought of the forest, of the quiet man who worked among the trees, and a small hope stirred in her heart. Maybe kindness could exist even in a world so full of hardship. The following days were difficult. Maria struggled to regain her strength, but she refused to stop working. She knew that if she slowed down, her son would suffer. Every morning, she rose before dawn, her body aching, and went to the fields with determination. Jacob walked beside her, carrying a small bundle of food, trying to help in his own little way. The villagers still whispered, but Maria had grown accustomed to their words. They no longer had the power to hurt her as much as they once did. Meanwhile, Eli began to notice her absence more keenly. He saw that she was not walking along the river as she usually did, and he wondered if she was unwell. Despite his quiet nature, he felt concern for her. He had grown used to seeing her, every day, to the simple routines they shared from a distance. The thought of something happening to her made his chest tighten in a way he had never felt before. Though he rarely spoke to anyone, he found himself thinking about her constantly, wondering if there was any way he could help. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a soft pink, Eli walked toward the path leading to the village. He saw Maria struggling to carry a heavy load of grain back to her home. Her small frame trembled under the weight, and Jacob tugged at the bundle, trying to help, but only adding to the difficulty. Without thinking, Eli stepped forward. "Let me help," he said firmly but gently. Maria looked up, startled by his sudden appearance, and then nodded, grateful for the assistance. Together, they carried the load to her small home, moving silently, with only the sound of their steps and the rustling wind between them. When they reached her home, Maria thanked him again, her voice soft with exhaustion and relief. Eli only nodded, giving a small, understanding smile. There was no need for more words. In that quiet moment, both felt a sense of relief and connection. Though they had not spoken much, they had begun to trust one another. Maria felt a warmth she had not felt in years, a comfort that came not from wealth or status but from simple kindness and understanding. As the night fell and the village lights twinkled in the distance, Maria sat by the small fire in her home, Jacob asleep in her arms. She thought of Eli, the quiet lumberjack who had appeared so unexpectedly in her life. She did not know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time she felt hope. Maybe, just maybe, life could be kinder than she had imagined. Eli, returning to his cabin in the forest, also felt a sense of warmth he had not known before. He realized that seeing Maria struggle every day had made him feel a connection, a desire to help and protect. Though he was used to solitude, the thought of her and her child stirred something new within him. A silent promise formed in his heart, that he would be there if she needed him, no matter what. And so, in the quiet village surrounded by mountains and forests, two lives began to move closer together. Maria, the young widow caring for her son, and Eli, the lonely lumberjack, shared a connection that was growing slowly, like a seed taking root in the soil. It was the beginning of a story that neither of them could yet imagine, a story of kindness, trust, and a bond that would soon change both of their lives forever. The weather in the mountains could change suddenly, and that evening it had turned dark and stormy. Rain poured down in heavy sheets and the wind howled through the narrow paths of the village. Maria had just finished gathering firewood to keep her home warm. She carried a small bundle in her arms, and Jacob held her hand tightly as they hurried through the muddy streets. The clouds above were thick and dark, and the first drops of rain had already soaked their hair and clothes. Her little home, though familiar, seemed fragile against the storm's fury. Every gust of wind made the roof creak, and Maria worried that it might not hold through the night. As they struggled along the slippery path, Maria noticed the water rising near the riverbank. It had never rained like this before, and fear tightened her chest. Jacob tugged at her hand, shivering from the cold. "Mama, I'm scared," he whispered, his small voice trembling. Maria tried to smile despite the worry gnawing at her heart. "It's okay, my love," she said softly. "We'll be safe soon. Just a little farther." She pulled him close, wrapping her thin shawl around them both. But the wind was merciless, and the rain soaked through their clothes. Most of the villagers had shut their doors and windows, ignoring the storm as if it were someone else's problem. They did not offer help to anyone in need, especially not to Maria, whom they considered unlucky. She had grown used to their judgment, but the fear in Jacob's eyes was harder to ignore. She needed shelter and fast, but where could she go? In the distance, a faint light flickered through the darkness. It came from a small cabin deep in the forest where Eli, the lumberjack, lived. He had been chopping wood all day, preparing for the storm, and had not expected anyone to come near. When he saw Maria and Jacob struggling through the rain, he didn't hesitate. He grabbed a thick cloak from his cabin, ran to the door, and called out, "Maria, come here quickly!" Maria had almost lost hope when she heard the voice. It was calm and steady, cutting through the storm like a guiding light. She ran toward it, slipping on the muddy ground, but Eli was already there, holding the door open. He ushered them inside without a word of judgment, only a quiet sense of urgency. Warm air from the fireplace welcomed them, and for the first time that evening Maria felt safe. She hugged Jacob tightly, letting him feel the warmth as they both shook from the cold. Eli handed them dry blankets and helped Maria change into some of his spare clothes. He had always lived simply, yet he seemed to have enough to share. Maria's eyes filled with tears of relief. She had never experienced such generosity without strings attached. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. Eli only nodded, a soft smile on his face. "Sit by the fire," he said. "You and your boy will be safe here tonight." Jacob, still shivering, crawled onto the rug near the fire, staring at the dancing flames with wide eyes. He had never seen a fire burn so brightly, nor felt warmth like this in days. Maria settled beside him, holding him close, and felt her own body begin to thaw from the cold. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, there was a feeling of peace she hadn't known for a long time. Eli moved quietly around the cabin, bringing more firewood and adding it to the hearth. He poured hot tea into mugs for Maria, giving her one and a small sip to Jacob. The tea's warmth spread through her body, and she realized how much she had been lacking, not just warmth, but human kindness. She watched Eli as he worked, noting the care in his movements, the gentleness in his gestures. He did not ask why she was out in the storm, nor did he question her life or her choices. He simply helped. The hours passed slowly. Maria and Jacob sat by the fire, listening to the rain pounding on the roof. The storm outside was fierce, yet inside the cabin there was a sense of safety and calm. Maria spoke softly to Jacob, telling him stories about heroes and brave women, hoping to keep his spirits high. She glanced at Eli from time to time, seeing him quietly chopping more wood for the fire, ensuring that they would not run out of warmth. She had expected suspicion, judgment, or even indifference from strangers, but Eli's kindness was steady and unwavering. As night fell deeper, the storm showed no sign of stopping. Maria worried about what she would do once the night ended, how she would return to her home, and how she would protect Jacob from the harsh elements. She wanted to thank Eli properly to explain her situation, but words seemed small compared to the help he had already given. Eli noticed her hesitation and simply said, "You don't need to explain. Rest. Tomorrow is another day." His calm voice made her heart feel lighter. Jacob eventually fell asleep on the rug, his small hand clutching Maria's. She watched him, marveling at his resilience and innocence. Then she turned to Eli. "I don't know how to repay you," she said softly. "You didn't have to help us." Eli shook his head. "Kindness doesn't need repayment," he said simply. "Sometimes we all need a little help. Tonight you needed it, and I was here." The rain continued to fall throughout the night, but Maria felt a sense of hope that had long been absent from her life. She realized that even in a world full of judgment and cruelty, there were people who could care without asking for anything in return. Eli had not offered sympathy or pity. He had offered warmth, safety, and respect. That made all the difference. In the quiet of the cabin, Maria thought about the path that had led her here. Her husband had died, leaving her alone, and most people in the village had turned away. She had struggled day after day, feeling invisible and unwanted. Yet here was a man who saw her, not as unlucky or weak, but as a person deserving of help and compassion. She could not stop the tears from forming in her eyes, not out of sadness, but out of relief and gratitude. By morning, the storm began to ease. The rain had slowed and a soft light peeked through the clouds. Maria woke to find Eli already up, tending to the fire and preparing some simple breakfast. Jacob stirred and rubbed his eyes, smiling at the sight of warm food and a dry floor beneath him. The cabin felt like a sanctuary, a place where the hardships of life had not reached them yet. Maria knew she had to return home soon, but for the first time she felt that she could face her struggles with renewed strength. Eli's quiet presence had given her more than shelter. It had given her hope. She realized that help could come from the most unexpected places, that kindness could appear in a world that often seemed cruel. She watched him as he moved about the cabin, his calm efficiency and gentle manner teaching her something she had almost forgotten, that people could care without conditions, and that trust could be built slowly, quietly, without words. Before leaving, Maria looked at Eli with gratitude. "Thank you for everything," she said. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Eli only nodded, his eyes soft. "You and your son are welcome anytime," he said. "The storm may be over, but you can always come here if you need a safe place." Those words stayed with her long after she had returned to her home, carrying a sense of security and trust she had not felt in years. As Maria and Jacob made their way back through the muddy path, the village seemed a little less harsh. The judgmental whispers and sidelong glances still existed, but they no longer held power over her. She knew that there was someone who cared for them, someone whose kindness had shown her that not all people were cruel or selfish. That small spark of hope, ignited in the cabin during the storm, would guide her in the days to come. And so the bond between Maria and Eli began, quietly and slowly, forged not through words or promises, but through action and care. It was a connection that would grow stronger with time, built on trust, understanding, and the simple but profound act of offering help when it was most needed. After the storm, life slowly returned to its usual rhythm in the village. But something had changed for Maria. She felt a quiet sense of comfort and hope she had not experienced for a long time. The memory of Eli's cabin, the warmth of the fire, and the safety he had offered her and Jacob lingered in her thoughts. Each day as she worked in the fields, she would glance toward the forest, wondering what Eli was doing. She realized she looked forward to seeing him, not just for help, but for the silent reassurance his presence gave her. Eli, too, noticed that he thought about Maria and Jacob more often. He had spent years living alone in the forest, accustomed to the quiet and solitude, but now the idea of seeing them brought a strange, pleasant feeling to his heart. It was not just concern, it was curiosity, warmth, and even joy. He began to prepare more firewood than usual, not just for himself, but in case Maria or Jacob needed shelter again. Each day, when he walked to the village to sell his wood, he made small observations about Maria's work. He noticed the way she carried herself with dignity despite exhaustion, the way she encouraged Jacob to help her, and the gentle smiles she gave even when the villagers' whispers were cruel. One afternoon, Maria decided to repay Eli for his kindness. She had prepared a small basket of fresh bread and some dried fruits, modest offerings from the small garden she tended behind her home. She walked through the forest path toward his cabin, feeling a mix of nervousness and gratitude. When she reached the cabin, Eli was outside chopping logs with the steady rhythm of his axe. He looked up as she approached, and his calm eyes met hers. "I brought something for you," Maria said softly, holding out the basket. Eli accepted it with a small nod, inspecting the contents briefly before smiling. "Thank you," he said simply. "You didn't have to." Maria shook her head, feeling a little embarrassed. "I want to. You helped us when no one else would." Eli only nodded again, placing the basket on the wooden table inside the cabin. He gestured for her to sit by the fire, and Maria hesitated only briefly before moving closer. Jacob, curious as ever, ran around the cabin, inspecting the tools and the firewood, then climbed onto a chair near the fire, smiling at the warmth. Days turned into weeks, and Maria found herself visiting Eli's cabin more often. At first, it was to bring small gifts or to repay his kindness in some way, but soon it became a habit. She enjoyed the quiet conversations they shared, The way he listened without interrupting, and the safety of knowing she and Jacob were welcome there. Eli, in turn, seemed to open up more. He shared stories of his childhood, the hardships he had faced in the forest, and the lessons he had learned from living alone. Maria listened intently, feeling a connection she had never thought possible with anyone outside her family. Jacob, for his part, was delighted by the cabin. He loved running among the logs, playing with the small animals that occasionally wandered near, and watching Eli at work. He began learning small tasks like stacking firewood, carrying lighter logs, and even helping with some chores inside the cabin. Eli treated him with patience, explaining things clearly and encouraging him with gentle words. For Jacob, this was a world of discovery and adventure, one where he felt safe and valued. Maria often watched them together, her heart swelling with gratitude and admiration. The villagers, of course, noticed Maria's frequent visits to the forest. They began whispering again, this time with a different tone. Some warned Eli that she might be taking advantage of him, that she only visited to gain shelter or favors. Others teased Maria, suggesting she was wasting her time with a lonely man who had nothing to offer. But neither Maria nor Eli paid much attention to the gossip. They had experienced enough judgment and cruelty from the village to know that it was meaningless. What mattered was the trust and bond they were building. One chilly morning, Maria arrived at the cabin carrying a small bundle of clothes to wash. Eli had already started the fire, and the warmth filled the cabin as she entered. "Good morning," he said quietly, his voice calm as always. "Morning," Maria replied, smiling. She looked around, seeing the organized stacks of wood, the clean surfaces, and the simple but welcoming space. It felt like home, and for the first time in months, Maria allowed herself to relax completely. As they worked side by side, Maria noticed the small ways in which Eli cared for them. He had repaired the roof so that the cabin would not leak, built additional shelves for her modest supplies, and even set aside a corner for Jacob's small toys and books. Every action, small though it might have seemed, spoke of thoughtfulness and consideration. Maria began to understand that kindness could be measured not just in words, but in deeds. She felt increasingly comfortable around him, laughing quietly at his dry sense of humor and appreciating his quiet strength. Jacob, meanwhile, had formed a bond with Eli that was remarkable in its simplicity. He no longer clung to his mother constantly, knowing that Eli could keep him safe. He eagerly helped with chores, repeated tasks Eli showed him, and proudly demonstrated his growing skills. Eli, in turn, encouraged him with patience, praising his efforts and teaching him the importance of care and attention. Maria watched this dynamic with a sense of wonder, realizing that her son was learning values she had always hoped to instill, but had struggled to teach alone. One evening, as the sky turned a deep orange and the mountains were bathed in the last light of the sun, Maria and Eli sat together by the fire, taking a brief pause from their work. They spoke of simple things, the weather, the forest, and Jacob's small achievements. There was a quiet understanding in their conversation, an ease that required no explanation. Maria felt a sense of peace, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She realized that in Eli, she had found someone who understood her struggles, someone whose presence brought comfort and hope. The weeks continued in this rhythm. Maria's visits to the cabin became more frequent, and the bond between her and Eli grew stronger. She no longer visited solely out of gratitude. She enjoyed his company, valued his opinions, and felt a sense of belonging that had been missing for so long. Eli, in turn, found himself caring for Maria and Jacob in ways that surprised him. He had spent years alone, believing that solitude was enough, but now he realized that human connection could bring meaning and joy to life. One particularly cold morning, Maria arrived at the cabin to find Eli chopping wood in the crisp air. She handed him a small breakfast, and they shared it quietly by the fire. Jacob played nearby, his laughter echoing softly through the cabin. For a moment, Maria allowed herself to imagine a future where these mornings were routine, where her son grew up under the care of two loving figures, where life was not about survival alone but about warmth, kindness, and trust. She pushed the thought away quickly, knowing that hope must be nurtured carefully, but she could not deny the comfort it brought her heart. Eli, sensing her quiet reflection, simply nodded to her with understanding. He did not speak of the future or make promises, but his calm presence reassured Maria. She realized that trust and companionship could grow naturally, without words, without expectation. It was enough to share the moments, to work together, and to care for one another quietly. And so, the bond between Maria, Jacob, and Eli deepened, slowly transforming from simple acts of kindness into genuine friendship and trust. Maria felt a strength she had not known in months, a hope that seemed almost tangible. Jacob thrived in this environment, learning, laughing, and growing under the guidance of both his mother and Eli. Eli himself began to see life differently, recognizing that caring for others did not diminish his strength but enhanced it. In this quiet, simple way, their lives intertwined. No words were needed to express the growing connection. It was evident in their actions, their care, and the way they looked out for one another. The village continued to whisper. The world remained harsh at times, but inside Eli's cabin a small sanctuary had formed. It was a place where warmth, trust, and kindness created a foundation for something stronger, a foundation that would carry them through the challenges yet to come. Winter had fully settled over the mountains, painting the village and forest in shades of white and gray. The snow lay thick on the ground, making travel difficult and the days cold and short. Maria worked tirelessly to provide for Jacob, tending to her small garden and completing chores around their modest home. The harsh weather had made her daily tasks even more exhausting, yet she faced them with determination, thinking always of her son. She wrapped him in layers of cloth and blankets, ensuring he remained warm and safe, even when it meant she suffered the cold herself. Eli, meanwhile, continued his quiet work in the forest. He chopped wood and carried heavy logs through the snow, preparing for the months ahead. Yet his thoughts often lingered on Maria and Jacob. He had grown accustomed to seeing Maria in the village and by the river, but winter made her daily life more difficult, and he worried for her. The image of her struggling through snow and ice, carrying her burdens alone, weighed on his heart. He wanted to help, to make her life easier, yet he did not want to overstep. One particularly harsh morning, Maria awoke to find Jacob shivering in his bed. His small body was warm from fever and his cheeks burned red. She felt a pang of worry, knowing that the illness could worsen quickly in the cold. She dressed him in warm layers and tried to soothe him, but she knew she needed medicine. The nearest apothecary was miles away, and the snow-covered paths made the journey almost impossible. She realized that alone she could not manage this task. Remembering Eli's kindness and the safety of his cabin, Maria wrapped Jacob in blankets and ventured toward the forest. The snow crunched beneath her feet and the wind whipped sharply against her face. Each step was slow and laborious, but her concern for her son pushed her onward. She reached Eli's cabin and he was already outside, preparing logs for the fire. When he saw her struggle through the snow, carrying Jacob in her arms, his face softened. Without hesitation, he ran toward her and took Jacob gently from her arms. "Your son is sick," he said quietly, his voice full of concern. Maria nodded, trying to hold back tears. "I need to get medicine, but the path is too dangerous in this snow," she explained. Eli immediately understood and offered a solution. He bundled them inside the cabin, prepared a warm drink for Jacob, and dressed him in additional layers to protect him from the cold. Maria watched, grateful and overwhelmed, realizing again how much Eli cared without expectation or judgment. For several days, Eli remained by their side, ensuring Jacob received care and warmth. He made the fire larger and more constant, carried water from the stream, and prepared small meals that Jacob could eat despite his illness. Maria, though exhausted, felt an immense relief. She no longer had to bear the burden alone. Eli's presence brought comfort not only to her son, but to her heart as well. She began to understand that trust and companionship could exist even in the midst of hardship. During those days, Maria saw a different side of Eli. Though he had always been quiet and reserved, his concern for Jacob and for her was evident in every action. He moved gently, spoke softly, and anticipated their needs before they had to ask. Maria felt a growing respect and affection for him, seeing that his strength was not just in his hands or his ability to survive alone, but in the care and attention he gave to others. She realized that kindness could be as powerful as courage, and perhaps even more lasting. Jacob's recovery was slow but steady. He laughed for the first time in days as Eli handed him a warm cup of tea. He ran around the cabin, pretending to chop small pieces of wood with a tiny toy axe. Maria watched, her heart swelling with joy as the bond between her son and Eli deepened. It was a bond built on patience, care, and shared experiences. Maria realized that Eli was no longer just a helper or a friend. He was becoming a part of their small family. One evening after Jacob had fallen asleep, Maria and Eli sat together by the fire. The cabin was quiet except for the soft crackle of the flames. Maria hesitated before speaking, unsure how to put her feelings into words. "Eli," she began softly, "I don't know how to thank you. You've done so much for us. I don't know what I would have done without you." Eli looked at her with calm, steady eyes. "You don't need to thank me," he said simply. "I care about you and Jacob, that's all that matters." Maria felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. She realized that what she felt for Eli went beyond gratitude. It was admiration, trust, and something deeper she could not yet name. She had spent so many years struggling alone, feeling invisible and unwanted, and now she saw that someone could care for her sincerely without expectation. She allowed herself to lean slightly toward him, feeling the quiet comfort of his presence. Days turned into weeks, and the snow began to melt slightly under the morning sun. Maria's home and cabin life had become intertwined with Eli's presence. She no longer worried alone, and Jacob thrived under the care and guidance of both his mother and Eli. The villagers continued their whispers and sideways glances, but Maria had learned to ignore them. She focused on what mattered, the bond they were building, the safety of her son, and the quiet love that was growing slowly between her and Eli. Then came a particularly cold morning when Maria noticed Eli had worked tirelessly to clear the path to her home and bring supplies. She was touched by the gesture, realizing that he did not just help when it was convenient but went out of his way to make their lives easier. That evening, as they sat together by the fire, Maria's feelings became clear. She had come to care deeply for Eli, not only for his kindness but for his steady, patient nature. She knew that he had become essential to their small family, a source of strength, comfort, and love. Eli, too, had begun to feel something he had not felt in years. He had spent much of his life alone, believing solitude was enough. Yet through his care for Maria and Jacob, he had discovered a joy and fulfillment that he had never known. He realized that he wanted more than companionship. He wanted to be part of this small family permanently. He wanted to provide, protect, and love them openly. That realization filled him with both courage and nervousness. He knew he could not rush Maria, but he could show her through his actions that he intended to remain by her side. One evening, as the sky turned soft shades of orange and pink, Eli spoke quietly. "Maria," he said, "I have lived alone for many years and I never thought I would need anyone, but now, I want to be here for you and Jacob. Always. You both mean more to me than I can say." Maria looked at him, her eyes wide with emotion. She felt tears rise not from sadness but from the overwhelming warmth of his words. She had never expected someone to care for her like this, to offer love and protection without hesitation. Jacob, sitting nearby and listening, smiled and leaned against Eli. "I like having you here," he said simply. Eli's heart swelled at the words. The boy's trust and affection meant more to him than anything else. Maria, watching the scene, felt her heart full. She realized that their bond was no longer just about survival or kindness. It had grown into love, trust, and a sense of belonging. Eli's declaration marked a turning point. Maria felt a mixture of relief, joy, and anticipation. She knew that the path ahead would not be easy. The village would still judge, the world could still be harsh. But with Eli by her side, she felt capable of facing anything. She realized that life could be kinder than she had imagined, and that love could emerge in the most unexpected ways. From that day, their lives changed. Eli became a permanent presence in their home, sharing chores, caring for Jacob, and offering Maria the companionship she had longed for. Their days were filled with simple joys, preparing meals together, tending the garden, and sharing quiet moments by the fire. Slowly, their bond deepened, built on trust, shared experiences, and unwavering support. Maria felt a growing certainty that this man, who had once simply offered shelter during a storm, was now an irreplaceable part of their lives, and so, in the harsh winter of the mountains, a small family had begun to form. Through acts of care, patience, and kindness, Maria, Jacob, and Eli discovered a love that was quiet but strong, simple but profound. It was a love that did not need grand gestures or elaborate promises, but one that would sustain them through the challenges ahead. For Maria, it was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter of hope, warmth, and a bond that would soon turn into something permanent and unbreakable. Spring slowly arrived in the mountains, melting the snow and filling the air with the scent of blooming flowers. The village remained quiet, surrounded by forests and hills, yet life for Maria, Jacob, and Eli had begun to take on a new rhythm. Each day brought simple joys and small achievements, and for the first time in years, Maria felt a sense of peace that had been missing from her life. Eli had become a permanent presence in their home, not just as a helper, but as part of their family. He woke early every morning, gathering firewood and preparing for the day. He tended the garden with Maria, showing Jacob how to plant seeds, water the soil, and care for the growing plants. Maria watched him, amazed at how naturally he fit into their lives, how effortlessly he cared for them, and how deeply his presence had begun to comfort her heart. She realized that his quiet strength and unwavering patience had turned their small household into a home filled with love and security. Jacob, growing stronger and healthier with each passing day, now ran freely around the cabin, laughing and playing as he helped Eli with chores. The boy's admiration for Eli was evident in every action, from mimicking the way he chopped wood to eagerly carrying small bundles of firewood to the house. Eli encouraged him with gentle words, praising his efforts and teaching him important lessons about responsibility, patience, and care. Maria watched this growing bond, feeling gratitude and joy, knowing that her son was learning valuable lessons from a man whose heart was as kind as it was strong. As the days passed, Maria began to feel something deeper stirring within her. She realized that she cared for Eli not only for his kindness, but also for the comfort, trust, and safety he provided. She admired his quiet strength, the way he treated Jacob with love and patience, and the way he respected her without question or judgment. For the first time in her life, she felt that she could rely on someone completely, and that realization brought both warmth and anticipation to her heart. Eli, too, had grown increasingly aware of his feelings. His life had been one of solitude for many years, and he had convinced himself that he did not need anyone. Yet, through his care for Maria and Jacob, he discovered a sense of joy and fulfillment he had never experienced. He realized that he wanted more than just companionship. He wanted to be a protector, a father figure, and a partner. Every smile from Maria, every laugh from Jacob strengthened this desire. He knew he could not keep these feelings inside much longer. One chilly morning, as the sun rose over the mountains and painted the snow with a golden hue, Eli approached Maria while she tended the garden. Jacob was nearby, playing with a small wooden toy Eli had carved for him. Eli's heart beat faster than it had in years, and he felt a mix of nervousness and determination. He knew the moment had come to speak from his heart, to express the feelings that had grown quietly over time. "Maria," Eli began softly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I have spent many years alone believing that solitude was enough, but now I realize that my life is better because of you and Jacob. I cannot imagine my days without you both." Maria paused, her hand stilling as she looked up at him, sensing the sincerity in his voice. Eli continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "I have come to care for you more than I can say. I want to be here for you and Jacob always. If you will allow me, I would like to make our bond permanent. I want us to be a family. Truly." Maria's heart raced. She had spent years enduring judgment and loneliness, but now she stood before a man who had offered her love, respect, and unwavering support. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming realization that she had finally found someone who valued her and her son completely. Jacob, sensing the seriousness of the moment, ran to Eli and hugged him tightly. "I want you to stay forever," he said simply. Eli smiled, holding the boy close, and Maria felt a rush of emotion. She knew in that instant that her answer was clear, that her heart had chosen him long before the words could be spoken. She stepped closer to Eli, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "Yes, Eli. I want to be with you, and I want us to be a family." With that, the bond that had grown quietly over months became official in their hearts. Eli took Maria's hand gently, and together they embraced, feeling a sense of joy and relief that words could hardly capture. For the first time, Maria felt truly safe, truly loved, and truly accepted. The hardships of the past seemed distant, replaced by the warmth of family, love, and shared life. Their marriage was simple, yet meaningful. The village church held a small ceremony with only a few witnesses, the priest, Jacob, and some villagers who had grown to respect Maria. It was not grand or elaborate, but it was filled with sincerity, love, and hope. Maria wore a simple dress, and Eli's hands were strong but gentle as he held hers. The vows they exchanged were not about wealth, beauty, or status, but about love, trust, and commitment. Jacob stood between them, smiling and proud, knowing that his family was now complete. After the ceremony, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Eli and Maria worked side by side, caring for the cabin, the garden, and Jacob. They shared small moments of laughter, meals by the fire, and quiet conversations about their hopes for the future. The bond between them continued to deepen, not just through words, but through everyday acts of love, patience, and care. Their family thrived, and the hardships of the past were gradually replaced by the strength of their connection. The villagers, who had once whispered and judged, slowly began to notice the change. They saw Maria smiling genuinely, Jacob laughing and healthy, and Eli strong, kind, and devoted. Curiosity turned to respect, and respect slowly grew into admiration. The story of their love became known throughout the valley, not as a tale of pity, but as proof that true kindness and care could overcome loneliness, hardship, and judgment. People began to understand that real love was not measured by wealth or status, but by actions, loyalty, and the courage to care for one another. Years passed, and the small family continued to flourish. Eli's wood business grew steadily, and he often employed villagers who needed work, teaching them skills and sharing the profits fairly. Maria managed the household and helped with business matters, her intelligence and diligence contributing greatly to their success. Jacob grew into a healthy, confident boy, learning values of kindness, responsibility, and resilience from both of his parents. Their home became a place of warmth and welcome, a sanctuary for those in need, and a symbol of what love and care could achieve. Maria often reflected on the journey that had brought them together. She remembered the whispers, the loneliness, and the struggles, and marveled at how one man's quiet kindness had transformed her life. Eli had not only offered shelter during a storm, but he had also provided a home, love, and a family. She realized that life could be full of unexpected blessings, and that sometimes the most meaningful connections came from acts of simple compassion. Eli, too, often thought about how much his life had changed. He had once believed that solitude was sufficient, that he could live and die alone in the forest. Yet meeting Maria and caring for Jacob had brought joy, purpose, and a sense of belonging he had never known. He understood that love was not a sudden, overwhelming force, but a quiet, steady presence built over time through trust, kindness, and shared experiences. Together they faced each day with gratitude, resilience, and hope. Their love was not perfect. There were small disagreements and challenges, but it was genuine, unwavering, and strong. It had been tested by hardship, loneliness, and the harsh judgments of others, and it had endured. Maria, Eli, and Jacob had built a life rooted in care, respect, and mutual support. A life that promised stability, happiness, and love for years to come. In the end, the story of Maria, Eli, and Jacob became more than just a tale of survival or romance. It was a story of courage, patience, and the transformative power of kindness. It proved that even in the harshest conditions, and even when the world seems unfair, love and trust can flourish. It showed that the simplest gestures, a warm fire, a helping hand, a quiet presence, can change lives forever. And so, in a small village surrounded by forests and mountains, a once lonely widow and her son found a home, love, and family in the unlikeliest of places. Eli, the quiet lumberjack, became more than a friend. He became a husband, a father, and a source of hope. Maria, the young woman who had faced judgment and hardship alone, found her heart full again, knowing that she would never have to face life's storms without someone by her side. Together they built a life that was simple, genuine, and full of joy. A life that proved that love, when given freely and without expectation, could conquer even the greatest struggles.